black t-shirt.
I was wondering if trolls self-identify as trolls?
Oh yeah, yes. I mean, that was, I wanted to avoid, when I started framing this project, I wanted to avoid trying to explain assholes on the internet. That's too big. There are too many of them. So I had to limit my focus, and so what I guess no one's stopping you from calling someone you find on the internet who you think is mean. You can call them a troll all you want, but that's not what I am focusing on. I'm focusing on the people who self-identify as trolls, and for me, that's sort of the subcultural marker, are these the people who say, yeah, I'm a troll? You know, well, I troll you, ask me how. Like, those are the guys that I'm essentially sort of coordinating my research on.
Cool. I had glasses here in the second row, and catch my eye if you want.
I guess I was going to ask a similar question, which is just like, are there trolls, or is there simply only trolling behavior? So I'll often find myself on both sides of the troll, and I don't consider myself a troll at all, but I'll sometimes like regular troll.
Yeah, I mean, the semantics get really tricky, and so instead of trying to create sort of like a concrete I think that a baseline set of definitions is important because it allows you to, like I said, cordon off what you are and what you're not talking about. But there's also a great deal of fluidity within those concepts, and so people can behave trollishly. I mean, typically I turn it into an adjective when it's not, they're not exactly trolls, they're not necessarily identifying, you know, but they're behaving in a way that seems to be, it reads as trollish. And when you do it that way, then it's sort of easier to kind of look back in sort of history and talk about behaviors that would have been recognizably trollish to today's trolls. But it's a very good question, and it took me a long time to figure out exactly where I put the boundaries.
Hat in the middle.
Yeah. Would you say that, I mean, you were saying earlier that many people will identify every asshole as troll. You did not ask, but would you say that all the trolls you met are assholes?
No, I mean, there's a whole spectrum of troll. I mean, trolling behaviors run the gamut from rickrolling stuff all the way to the really, really extreme memorial page trolling. And so to try to make an overarching claim about all of them who are subsumed under that category is just problematic, and not to mention inaccurate. And it doesn't do either of those subcategories any justice. So trying to apply one theory to the rickroll troll guy is just, it's not the same. You're not necessarily talking about the RIP troll when you talk about him. So trying to find sort of subheadings within that category, it's tricky, and it's certainly not a science, but being aware of those differences, I think, is very important, because also, just at a practical level, how you respond to a memorial page troll is and should be different than how you respond to a rickroll type troll.
Second row here.
This is sort of a two-parter, but is there anything really like sacred for trolls that they won't touch? I mean, there's some ridiculous stuff like RIP sites where people will go to. But then you talk about like the Cheesetown Crier. Is that the right name?
Yeah, Cheesetown Crier.
Yeah. So like, are there trolls on there at all, or like, yes, there are. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, trolls everywhere.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, are there any true like safe havens, and if so, how are they created?
Safe havens, oh man.
World of Warcraft is totally free. Safe space.
I mean, oh my God. I mean, I know that on the Cheesetown Crier, like, especially around the time that school vacations would start, they would come, there would be like, you know, one of the focus group participants basically is one of the owners of the Cheesetown Crier, and she said that, I mean, this was like a 72-year-old lady who like never really left her house because she had like, you know, it was a source of community for her. Like, she was on the site all day long. It was like a main source of social interaction for her. And they would come on, I mean, I was assuming, you know, like high school kids or whatever, because it's during school vacations, and they would call them, quote, a bunch of retards who don't know how to speak English. So, I mean, that's not that surprising, to be perfectly honest, but like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really think that there is I mean, I don't know.
I mean, trolls, I would say, is there a safe haven? Probably not. And if there is, it's some sort of lockdown community that trolls couldn't access. So I mean, if it doesn't exist, we can't see it necessarily. So Does it exist? It's the tree falling sound question alone thing.
I mean, and isn't trolling kind of a public behavior
It is,
anyway?
right, it's public behavior, so it would be kind of hard to do it privately, and it wouldn't be, you know, there wouldn't be as many lulls to extract. But one of the things though that I have found very interesting is that in the research I found that almost all the trolls that I've worked with, they have boundaries. They have boundaries that they themselves won't cross, but they're not going to advertise those, because if they did, if they said, look, I'm just not comfortable. I mean, a lot of the trolls really think that memorial page trolling is gross and wouldn't do it, but they don't wear that sign around their neck. They don't say, now, you boys need to not troll because it, you know, it makes me uncomfortable, because then they would become that which they are. They would be troll bait suddenly. So, you know, they just don't say that they're not cool with something. But just because they don't say it doesn't mean that they're not. That again, there's this whole spectrum. And some people are really like, no, I only go after, you know, political targets. I only go after, you know, homophobes. Certain trolls really just restrict their behavior to homophobes. So I answer with a question mark, which is how I answer a lot of questions. I wish that it was more definitive. No, I don't. I don't wish it were more definitive. It's better this way.
Okay, green t-shirt.
Yeah, I was wondering about, like, so you know, you've been talking a lot about, like, why people troll, but I was wondering more about, like, curious about the origins of trolling on the internet. Like, where did trolling start, like, for communities on the internet, or do you know anything about that?
I mean, yeah, trolling has been around as long as there's been an internet, and people, you know, people play with stuff. I find the more interesting origins to look at are more cultural origins. So we're talking beyond BBS stuff, but you know, thinking to get back to your question, shirt. I don't know your name.
Yeah, that's right.
The guy who's wearing a shirt. But that you're able to sort of see trollish behavior. It's embedded within the Western tradition. This is a tradition that sort of values yelling at each other and winning. You know, winning is built into this sort of Western tradition, and so of course there are trolls. This is what we're trained to do. This is what philosophy teaches us. This is Socrates. This is the sophists. Like, these are things that you can look back in time and say, I recognize that. Which isn't to say that Socrates was a troll, because the subcultural meaning didn't exist back then, blah, blah, blah. But you can look back and say, we recognize these behaviors. So again, it's really important to remember that these things that are happening now they don't exist in a vacuum, and they don't just appear. That we can trace them back and find things that are at least vaguely recognizable. They didn't have computers back then, so there were no online trolls. But if there had been, you know, probably, of course there would have been. This is what we do as Westerners, and I'm deliberately, to sort of get to your question, I'm speaking from a very particular Western context, one that is privileged in these really important ways. So we're talking about sort of androcentric ideology. That's what we're dealing with. So I'm not saying we in an unconsidered way. This is a very specific we. So let the record show that I realize that.
So just quickly, we are technically at the end of our session. I kind of want to keep these questions going because we've got the room for some extra time. So if you guys have somewhere to be and want to quietly exit, more power to you. But I'm just going to keep calling on people, and I hope that's not wrong in any way. I've got left, young, gray sweater. Sorry, purple shirt. Purple shirt, you're on the list now.
Another troll question. Really, is there an average profile of a troll? Like, who are these people? Are the worst of them, like, this certain category of person that you could pick out of a crowd, or is it just totally...
You know, that used to be an easier question to answer, but because of this mainstreaming over the web, all the stuff we've been talking about all weekend, that has impacted, you know, who sort of flags themselves as trollish IRL. Like before, the trollish people would sort of indicate it with really obscure trolling references, but because those references have become fairly pervasive, it's hard to see it. So that's been a really interesting thing. I would do this, it's not a trick, but when I would teach my classes, I would throw a reference out into the ether just to see who would take the bait. And someone's ears would perk up when I mentioned, you know, Grin Man or whatever, and I'd be like, oh, friend, I know what you are. But now, and then I would watch them, I would observe them, because you could tell who they were. They would somehow flag themselves. And especially when they found out what I did, it was this very interesting dynamic between students, and that has changed. that more, almost, half the class are getting the same references. So it's hard to tell IRL. It used to be a little easier. In terms of demographics generally, I mean, let's be honest, we're mostly talking about white dudes between a certain, a certain demographic, which isn't to say that there aren't, people who fall outside that category, but generally speaking, and if they're not, biologically male and phenotypically white, they exhibit oftentimes a great deal of white androcentric privilege. So they're replicating these ideologies that kind of flag them, maybe not literally, maybe not biologically, but certainly in terms of where they fall in this sort of Western tradition.
And a follow-up to that really quick is, has your troll research and the people that you interacted with, has that ever crossed over IRL, or did the threats, did anything ever come of that?
Oh, that's, I'm gonna not answer that question. It's a good question, and I have an answer, but I'm not gonna tell you.
Just quickly, I'd like to mention that I really appreciate that people are using IRL, the linguistics.
I got gray sweater.
Okay, so I sat in on the Q&A, and he was kind of talking and touching upon these simple memes and how the meme has evolved from where you were saying it was like a storytelling, people had these tools and had the know-how and the passion to kind of wade through the shit that was the internet and computers in the 90s and make things about it. So there was one quote he said that like advice dogs and these current types of memes are refined sugar of content, which kind of implies they have less value. And I just kind of wanted to know your opinion on that, because it seems like, at least with the Wildcats, that is what he's referring to. So I just wanted your take on that.
So the denigration of lolcats as a form is very common in academia. Anytime anyone, in the academic literature, the only time that it's ever been referenced is either with no judgment attached, or if you're Clay Shirky, the stupidest possible creative act. Yeah, so according to Clay Shirky, we should all be using our cognitive surplus to create massively, impressive, pieces of software that help, root out government corruption, like Ushahidi, that was his argument, right? So the thing is, though, is that lolcats and these types of memes, like Henry Jenkins says that these things have meaning because people attach meaning to them, right? So they're vehicles. I mean, it's the way in which people use them that determine whether or not they have meaning or not, I think, personally. I mean, what I noticed in my research is that it was all very personal, and that people would keep lulls and advice memes that they liked, and they would store them for later so that they could react to them in a very personal way. So you saw one that was funny and you knew that your friend would like it. They were saying that in the GIF panel as well, that it was very personalized. These little bits of content are very, they seem simple, but they actually traffic in really important things like emotional expression. So I think individually, they may seem unimportant, but collectively, they have a real purpose. And, one of the reasons I started studying lolcats was the head of our department. She started off studying soap operas back in the 80s. And everyone was like, you are ridiculous. This is the stupidest thing that you should be studying. Soap operas don't mean anything, blah, blah, blah. And what she said is, if you see something that's having a big reaction, don't look at the text, look at the reaction to the text. So, people, I think it's really worthwhile to study these things that most people think are stupid. I think studying reality television, when that first started, people were very, they didn't really think that it was worthwhile. Anyone who studies Jersey Shore, everyone, because it seems like low culture, it seems worthless, but the thing is that it's taken off for a reason, and that's why what I was trying to uncover is what is it about this that resonates so deeply, because it does. So.
And then I had red hair next to gray sweater.
I was wondering if your study of the various things you guys were saying on the internet has affected your use of the internet or your perception of the internet culture in any way. I know people who study art, for example, sometimes it takes away the joy a little bit of creating art. Has it changed for you since you started studying it?
I spoke a lot in law speak. while I was working on my thesis. It changed a little bit. One of the things that my professor kept asking me is, are you tired of your data? Or she would say, is your data still cute? Because I'm looking at cute cat pictures, and she was worried that I would get burnt out on it because a lot of people do, and I didn't get burnt out while I was working on my thesis. But after I finished, I had a panic attack the first time I went to Ike-and-Ash Cheeseburger after I was finished, because I had that reaction of, oh crap, I need to look for more lolcats. No wait, no I don't. It's okay, everything's gonna be okay. And because I was working on a very specific part of the internet, I kind of was in this bubble, and so some of the memes that have come out while I was working on it are ones that I'm not familiar with, and so that's affected my view of the internet for me.
Okay, and we're sadly at the end of our extra time. I apologize to those of you that I have marked down. Promise, if you rush up here, I will introduce you to whoever you want to talk to personally if I do caught my eye. But that being said, everyone please give a big round of applause for our panelists.